The Ukrainian government armed Nazis and pointed them at ethnic Russian civilians in eastern Ukraine, tortured and killed them for 8 years, and suppressed the story. Then when the reaction came, they handed you chapter 10, called it chapter 1, and told you how evil Putin was. Look, it's not complicated. I'm going to prove every word of this with UN sources, OSCE monitors, and a U.S. congressional letter. Let's end the lie once and for all. Ukrainians killed their own people in Donbass. That is what started the war. And here's the breakdown. In May 2014, the Ukrainian government stood up a volunteer militia called the Azov Battalion. Their founder, Andriy Beletsky, is a documented Nazi who put his ideology in writing. And this is not rumor or Russian talking point either. The man wrote it down, right? And Ukraine's interior ministry said, yeah, well, that's our guy. We'll take him. Why? Because the Ukrainian army was weak at the time and they needed more men. And obviously, they weren't picky about what was printed on the uniforms, were they? They funded all this with private oligarch money because if it's private, then nobody has to answer for it, right? Then in 2014-15, Ukraine's Azov Battalion rolled into Donbass, the eastern region where millions of ethnic Russians had lived for generations. Ukrainians with Russian names, Russian family, and Russian culture. Their own countrymen. And what does the UN document? Looting of civilian homes. Unlawful detention and torture carried out by Ukrainian Azov fighters against the civilians that they were actually there to protect. That's in the published UN report. And then in 2015, Ukraine's Azov Battalion's own spokesperson goes on record and says a large percentage of the recruits are Nazis with swastikas, SS regalia tattooed on their bodies and sewn into their uniforms. So what do the US and Canada do? Well, they announce they will not train or support Ukraine's Azov Battalion anymore due to their neo-Nazi connections. But they kept sending money anyway. 2015-2016, more UN reports. Ukrainian Azov embedding weapons inside civilian buildings, looting homes, displacing families, torturing detainees. Again, these aren't soldiers they're doing this to. These are ethnic Russian civilians living in eastern Ukraine in their own country, being terrorized by a battalion of their own government. So then in 2019, 40 members of the United States Congress signed a letter demanding Ukraine's Azov Battalion be designated a foreign terrorist organization. 40 elected officials looked at the evidence and said, man, these people are terrorists. That letter went nowhere. You probably never even heard of it until I just told you right now. Then finally, in 2022, after the citizens begged for help, Russia moved in. And overnight, every network on earth suddenly knows where Donbass is, and there's breaking news about big bad Russia. Where were they for 8 years? 2 years later, in June 2024, Washington then lifted the ban on weapons and training for Ukraine's Azov Battalion and decided, hey, the Nazis are fine. Look, this needs to be settled. These are documented facts. All the Slava Ukrainian people should be shocked by this if they truly support the Ukrainian people, not to push narrative. So to all the gullible virtue signaling trolls, save your breath. It's all documented. Do some research for once before you comment with more hate. Another thing, I'm not neutral about Nazis. I never will be. It doesn't matter what flag they're standing under, right? And we sent billions of dollars into this war without ever telling you the truth. And that, in my opinion, is a crime against every taxpayer. You deserve to know this back in 2014. They just made sure you didn't. Look, if you really want to understand how this gets done to a population, how information gets weaponized before it ever reaches your eyes, that's book number 4 in the Citizen Servant Leader series called Information Warfare. Grab it on Amazon. And hey, let's start talking about the truth and not some propaganda.